Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Let's return to the story of how James and Lily's lives intertwined further. After their brief encounter, James could not stop thinking about Lily. He replayed their conversation in his mind over and over, fascinated by her warmth, her honesty, and the way she seemed so different from everyone else he knew. He had been surrounded by people who either wanted something from him or saw him as a stepping stone, but Lily was different. She didn't care about his wealth or status. She just seemed to see him for who he really was, and that made him feel human. It was a feeling he had almost forgotten existed. The next few days passed in a blur of meetings and business trips, but James found his thoughts drifting back to Lily. He had been thinking about her ever since that night, and it wasn't just because of her beauty or her charm, it was something deeper. She had opened a door in him that had long been shut. He had everything a man could want, but there was still an emptiness inside him that his wealth could never fill. His father's will loomed in the back of his mind, reminding him of the marriage contract he needed to fulfill, but James knew that marrying for convenience wouldn't bring him happiness. What he needed was something real, and he wondered if Lily could somehow be part of that. One evening, after yet another tiring day of business, James found himself standing outside the cafe where he had met Lily. He hadn't planned on being there, but his feet seemed to take him there on their own. As he stood on the street corner, waiting for the light to change, his phone buzzed. It was a text from his lawyer, reminding him about the deadline to finalize the terms of his marriage contract. He groaned. He had to move fast, but he couldn't ignore the fact that he still hadn't fully figured out what he wanted. As he stood there lost in thought, he noticed Lily walking down the street, her head down as she passed by. James hesitated for a moment, but then his legs moved on their own again, and he found himself calling out to her. She looked up, surprised to see him standing there. A faint smile spread across her face as she approached him. Lily's eyes softened, and she tilted her head slightly, as if trying to understand what he was saying. James nodded, feeling a mixture of anxiety and hope. It was not like him to be so open with someone, but something about Lily made him want to be honest. Lily raised an eyebrow, still unsure of where this conversation was going, but her curiosity was piqued. James took a deep breath and decided to be honest with her. He watched her closely as she processed what he had said. There was a long pause, and Lily seemed to be weighing his words. James shook his head quickly, almost too eagerly. Lily was silent for a moment, her mind racing. She had always dreamed of a better life, but this was a step into territory she had never imagined for herself. Still, there was something about James that tugged at her heart. She had seen the loneliness in his eyes when they had spoken, and it made her wonder if there was more to him than the cold businessman persona he showed the world. James took a step closer to her, his gaze sincere. There was a long silence between them. Lily's mind raced as she considered his offer. She could see the desperation in his eyes, and for some reason, she couldn't bring herself to say no just yet. She had always believed in helping others, and something in her told her that helping James might be the right thing to do. Finally, she sighed and looked up at him. James nodded, grateful for the chance to talk more. As they stood there, the night air cool around them, neither of them knew just how much their lives were about to change. Let's return to the story of how their lives began to intertwine. Days passed, and the tension between James and Lily grew. James could not stop thinking about her. She had agreed to consider his proposal, but deep down, he wondered if she was just being polite. He had never been in a position where he needed to rely on someone else for anything, especially not for something so personal. Yet, the more he thought about it, the more he realized how much he actually needed her help. Meanwhile, Lily tried to focus on her own life. She went back to work at the diner, and although she had agreed to think about James' offer, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. She had always dreamed of a better life, but this? This was not what she had imagined. Marrying a man she barely knew, even if it was for a contract, felt like stepping into a world she was not ready for. But James' words kept echoing in her mind, "You don't have to love me, just help me get through this." One evening, after her shift, Lily found herself at home, staring at the small, cluttered apartment that had always been her world. It wasn't much, but it was hers. She could feel the weight of her decision bearing down on her. Could she really help a man who had everything, while she had so little? Her phone buzzed, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was James. "Lily, I know you're still thinking it over. Please, let me know what you decide. I need to move forward with this soon, and I can't do it alone." The message was simple but urgent, and it tugged at her heart. She didn't know why, but she found herself typing a reply. "I'll meet you tomorrow. We can talk more about it." The next day, Lily and James met at a quiet cafe, a place away from the hustle of his usual high-end spots. James sat at a small corner table, his posture stiff as he waited. When Lily walked in, she could see the exhaustion in his eyes. The billionaire who usually had everything under control seemed vulnerable. She took a seat across from him, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, James broke the silence. "Thank you for meeting me. I know you have your doubts, and I understand. I've been in your shoes before, feeling like life was just a series of things to get through. But I promise, this isn't just about the money. It's about saving something important to me, something my father built." Lily nodded, her fingers tracing the edge of her coffee cup. She could see the sincerity in his eyes, but it didn't make the decision any easier. "I don't know what to say," she confessed. "I mean, I get why you're doing this. But what happens after? What happens when this contract ends? Will it really be over? Or is there more to this than just a business arrangement?" James hesitated, then met her gaze. "I don't know. I can't promise you anything beyond this, but what I can promise is that I will do everything in my power to make sure this doesn't complicate your life. You won't have to deal with my family, or my business. We'll just fulfill the terms of the contract and leave it at that." Lily stared at him for a long moment. She had always felt like an outsider in this world of wealth and privilege, but now she was being asked to step into it, to play a role she had never imagined for herself. Still, she couldn't ignore the way James looked at her, like he was hoping she would say yes. "And if I say yes?" she asked quietly. James leaned forward, his voice softer now. "If you say yes, I'll make sure you're taken care of. You won't have to worry about anything. I'll help you with whatever you need. It's the least I can do for asking you to do this." Lily swallowed, feeling a mix of emotions. She had been raised to believe that hard work and perseverance were all that mattered, but this? This was different. She had spent so many years struggling, trying to make ends meet, and now, here was a man offering her a way out, but at what cost? "I'm still not sure about all of this," Lily said, her voice tinged with doubt. "But I'll do it. I'll help you. I'll be your wife, at least for now." James' expression softened, a look of relief washing over him. He reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "Thank you," he said quietly, his voice filled with gratitude. "I promise you won't regret this. I'll make sure you're safe. This is just the beginning." As they sat there, hands clasped across the table, both of them knew that their lives were about to change forever. Neither of them understood what would come next, but for the first time in a long while, James felt a glimmer of hope. He had someone to share his burden with. And Lily, despite all her reservations, couldn't help but wonder if this unexpected decision might just lead her to something more than she ever expected. Let's return to the story of how their lives began to intertwine even further. The next few days were a whirlwind for both James and Lily. They had agreed on the terms of their marriage contract, but the reality of it was settling in for both of them. James had arranged for everything to be done quickly, wanted to finalize it as soon as possible so he could get back to his life, or at least the life he was used to, but this time, things felt different. The quiet moments they shared when they discussed their plan had started to feel more real, and neither of them was prepared for how much their lives would change. As the days went by, Lily began the process of adjusting to her new reality. She was still working at the diner, but her mind was constantly on the marriage contract she had agreed to. She had told herself it was just temporary, that it was a means to an end. But deep down, she couldn't ignore the fact that she was living a life that wasn't hers. The world she had stepped into was foreign and cold, full of luxury and expectations she had never imagined for herself. She was supposed to pretend to be James' wife, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something more was beginning to stir in her. Meanwhile, James was throwing himself back into his business, his mind constantly preoccupied with the looming deadline. He couldn't let the contract lapse or else everything he had worked for would be gone. But even as he went through the motions of meetings and business deals, he found his thoughts drifting to Lily. He had spent so much of his life focused on building an empire, but now, the idea of building something real, something personal felt more important than ever. It was late one evening when James sent Lily a message, asking her to meet him for dinner. He knew that their arrangement was strictly professional, but he found himself wanting more. He didn't just want her as a partner in this contract, he wanted to understand her, to know her beyond the surface. The reality of his feelings surprised him. He had spent years guarding his emotions, but with Lily, it was different. She made him feel something he hadn't in a long time, something that felt real. Lily was hesitant, but she agreed to meet him. They met at a quiet, understated restaurant, a stark contrast to the lavish places James usually frequented. The atmosphere was cozy, and the dim lighting made the place feel intimate. As they sat down to eat, James couldn't help but notice how out of place he felt. The simplicity of the restaurant, the humble way Lily carried herself, it all felt so normal. And it was a feeling he didn't realize he craved. "I hope this is okay," James said, trying to make small talk. "I know it's not the kind of place you're used to." Lily looked up from her menu and smiled softly. "It's fine. It's nice to be somewhere quiet for a change," she said, her voice warm. They both fell into an easy silence, enjoying the moment. For a while, it felt like they were just two people having dinner, not business partners stuck in a contract. James looked at Lily, really looked at her, and for the first time in days, he felt a weight lift from his shoulders. She wasn't just a person in his life for convenience anymore. He realized that, without intending to, he had started to care for her. His heart was conflicted, knew what they had was meant to be temporary, but he couldn't deny what was growing inside him. As dinner came to a close, James put down his fork and cleared his throat. "Lily, I want to be honest with you. I know this isn't the ideal situation. But I'm starting to realize that this contract, it's not just about the money, or the legacy. It's about you, too." Lily raised an eyebrow, a hint of surprise crossing her face. "What do you mean?" James hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to put his feelings into words. "I didn't expect to feel this way. But the more I get to know you, the more I realize how important you've become to me. I know I made this offer to you out of necessity, but now I'm starting to see you as more than just someone who's helping me with a problem. I'm starting to care about you." Lily looked down at her plate, unsure of how to respond. She hadn't expected James to say something like that. She had always thought of him as distant, cold, a man whose wealth defined him. But now, she saw him in a different light. He was vulnerable, honest, and human. But could she allow herself to feel the same way about him? Could she let herself fall for a man who was essentially a stranger, someone she was supposed to be pretending to love? "James, Lily started, but her words faltered. "I don't know what to say." James smiled, a little wistfully. "You don't have to say anything. I just wanted you to know. And I'm not asking for anything in return. I just wanted to be honest with you." For a moment, they just sat there, the air between them thick with unspoken words. There was a tension that neither of them could ignore anymore. Lily had agreed to this contract for the money, for the stability it promised her, but she hadn't expected to be swept up in the complexities of emotions that came with it. I think we need to talk about this more," Lily said softly. "There's a lot we both need to figure out." James nodded in agreement, the weight of their unspoken connection lingering in the air. "We'll take it one step at a time," he said. "For now, let's just focus on getting through this together." As they left the restaurant that night, there was a sense of quiet understanding between them. Neither of them knew what the future held, but for the first time, they both felt like they were facing it together. Let's return to the story of how their journey began to shift in unexpected ways. As the days passed, James and Lily's relationship began to evolve. They were no longer just two people bound by a contract. Their connection was growing, slowly but surely. James found himself looking forward to their meetings more and more, whether it was for business or just to discuss the terms of their arrangement. He had always kept his emotions in check, but with Lily, something was changing inside him. He couldn't deny that he enjoyed spending time with her, even if it was only for short moments. She had become an unexpected presence in his life, and it was starting to feel like he needed her more than he had first realized. Lily, on the other hand, was grappling with her own feelings. She had agreed to the contract for the financial stability it promised her, but now, she couldn't ignore the growing connection between them. She saw James in a new light, someone who was not just a billionaire businessman, but a man who had his own struggles, his own fears. He wasn't the cold, untouchable figure she had imagined him to be. In many ways, he was more vulnerable than she had ever expected. And as she spent more time with him, she found herself beginning to care for him, even though she had told herself she wouldn't. One evening, after another long day at work, Lily received a message from James. He asked if she could meet him at his apartment to discuss something important. Lily was nervous. They hadn't seen each other in a few days, and the tension between them had been building. She wasn't sure what to expect, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something significant was about to happen. When Lily arrived at his apartment, she found James waiting in the living room. The space was as lavish as ever, with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the city. But tonight, the grandeur of the place felt empty. James stood by the window, his back turned to her, his expression unreadable. It was clear that he had been thinking about something for a while. "Lily," he said, turning to face her as she entered the room. "I've been thinking a lot about this whole situation, about us. And I realized that I never really stopped to ask how you're doing with all of this." Lily stood in the doorway, unsure of what to say. It wasn't that she hadn't been thinking about their arrangement, it had been weighing on her mind every day. But she hadn't expected James to be so open about his concerns. "I'm fine," she said, her voice a little softer than she intended. "I agreed to this, didn't I? I'm managing." James looked at her with a hint of concern in his eyes. "I know you agreed to it, but that doesn't mean it's been easy. I don't want you to feel like you're trapped in this, Lily. If you need out, I'll respect that. I don't want to be the one who's holding you back." Lily's heart fluttered at his words. She hadn't expected him to be so considerate. She had been so focused on the contract, on the future, that she hadn't really thought about the emotional side of things. But now, with James standing there, genuinely worried about her well-being, she realized that maybe they weren't just playing roles anymore. "I'm not trapped," Lily said slowly, stepping further into the room. "It's just complicated. I never expected to feel this way, to get so attached. I told myself this was just a temporary thing. But I'm starting to realize it's not that simple." James nodded, a slight smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Yeah, I get that. This whole thing was supposed to be about the contract, about fulfilling the terms, but I can't ignore the fact that it feels like more than that. I'm not saying we have to change everything overnight, but I think we owe it to ourselves to be honest about what this is becoming." Lily took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his words settle on her. She had tried to keep things professional, to keep her emotions in check, but now it felt like everything was shifting. She could see the sincerity in James' eyes, and for the first time, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't just a business arrangement. "I don't know where this is going," Lily said quietly, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "But I don't want to walk away from it either. I guess we'll figure it out together." James stepped closer to her, his expression softening. I'm glad to hear you say that. I don't know what the future holds, but I know I don't want to go through it alone. I've been alone for too long, Lily. Lily's heart skipped a beat as she looked into his eyes. She had always thought of James as someone who had everything, someone who didn't need anyone. But now, standing there in front of her, she realized how wrong she had been. He was just like her, someone looking for connection, for love, for something real. We'll figure it out, Lily said again, this time with more confidence. One step at a time. James nodded, his hand reaching out to gently touch hers. One step at a time, he echoed, his voice filled with a quiet promise. It wasn't going to be easy, but for the first time, they were both willing to take that first step together. As they stood there, hand in hand, neither of them knew what the future held, but one thing was certain: their journey together had only just begun. Let's return to the story of how their relationship continued to grow and change in unexpected ways. As the days passed, James and Lily's bond deepened in unexpected ways. What started as a business arrangement, a contract born out of necessity, was slowly transforming into something more. They were no longer just pretending to be husband and wife, they were learning to rely on each other, to support each other in ways neither of them had anticipated. For the first time in his life, James found himself opening up to someone. His world of power in business had always been isolating, but Lily was different. She listened, truly listened to him, and that made him feel seen. She wasn't just there for the money or the status, but because, like him, she was seeking something real. Her presence in his life, no matter how complicated it had been at the start, began to feel like the one thing that made sense. One evening, after a long day of meetings, James found himself at home thinking about their future. He had been busy with his company, but his thoughts kept drifting back to Lily. He had promised her that their contract would remain simple, no strings attached, but the truth was that he had already started to feel something for her. Something deeper than he could have imagined when they first entered into this arrangement. He had been afraid to admit it to himself, but now, it was undeniable. He sent her a message, asking if she could meet him at his apartment later that evening. She agreed, and soon enough, she was standing in his living room, her eyes soft with curiosity as she watched him from across the room. She had come to understand James more in the past few weeks than she had ever expected to. The more she got to know him, the more she realized how much he was hiding behind that cold, polished exterior. He wasn't just a wealthy CEO, he was a man struggling with the same loneliness and longing she had felt for years. "You wanted to talk?" Lily asked, her voice steady but gentle. James took a deep breath, gathering his thoughts. "Lily, I've been thinking a lot about this. About us. About everything we've been through so far. And I realize that I can't keep pretending this is just business. I care about you. More than I ever thought I could." Lily blinked, surprised by the intensity in his voice. She had known that their arrangement was changing them both, but hearing him say it out loud made her heart skip a beat. "James," she began, but she didn't know how to finish the sentence. She didn't want to say the wrong thing, didn't want to admit how much she had started to feel for him, too. He stepped closer to her, his eyes searching hers for any sign of doubt. "I know this wasn't supposed to be real. We agreed to keep things professional. But now, I don't know if I can just walk away from what's happening between us. I've never had anyone like you in my life. You've made me feel things I didn't even know I needed." The silence between them grew thick with unspoken words. Lily's heart was racing. She had come into this contract with the idea that it would just be a way to get by, a temporary arrangement that would eventually come to an end. But now, she wasn't so sure. James had become more than just a man she was pretending to marry. He had become someone she truly cared about. And the thought of walking away from him, of ending what had started to feel like something real, terrified her. "I never expected this," Lily said, her voice quiet. "I never expected to feel so connected to you. But I can't deny that something is happening here. I don't know what it means yet, but I don't want to run away from it either." James smiled, a small but sincere smile. "I don't want to run either. I don't know where this is going, but I'm willing to find out with you. We'll take it one step at a time. But we can't keep pretending that this is just a business deal anymore. We need to be honest with ourselves about what this is becoming. Lily nodded slowly, her heart swelling with emotion. She had always prided herself on being independent, on taking care of herself. But with James, she had found a kind of trust she had never known before. She realized, as she looked at him, that she didn't have to face the future alone anymore. I agree, she said softly, her voice full of emotion. We'll figure this out together. But no more pretending. Whatever this is, it's real now. James stepped forward, gently taking her hand in his. For the first time, he felt like he wasn't just bound by the constraints of a contract. He was bound by something deeper. Something he hadn't expected but now couldn't ignore. Together, he echoed, his voice filled with quiet conviction. The two of them stood there, hand in hand, facing a future that was uncertain but no longer solitary. Whatever happened next, they knew they were no longer just two people pretending to be something they weren't. They were beginning to build something real together. Let's return to the story of how their relationship deepened and how they began to face new challenges that would test their bond even further. As the days went on, James and Lily found themselves growing closer. What had started as a simple contract marriage was now evolving into something neither of them had expected. James had never thought he would feel this way, but with each passing day, he realized that he was falling for Lily. She had brought something into his life that he never thought he would find: genuine companionship. She was no longer just the woman he needed to marry to secure his family's legacy. She had become someone he cared about deeply, someone he didn't want to lose. But as their connection grew, so did the complications. The business world James had built was always there, lurking in the background, and it wasn't going to let him escape that easily. His company was facing some serious challenges, and the pressure was mounting. Lily, who had always been supportive, could see the toll it was taking on him. She knew James had a lot on his plate, and while she was there for him, she couldn't help but feel like she was getting lost in his world of business and expectations. One evening, after yet another long day of meetings, James came home, looking more exhausted than usual. His suit was wrinkled, and his tie hung loosely around his neck. He walked into the apartment, and Lily could see the weight of the world on his shoulders. Without saying a word, she stood up and walked over to him. "Hey," she said softly, placing her hand on his arm. "You look like you've been through hell." James sighed, closing his eyes for a moment. "It's just the business," he muttered, running a hand through his hair. "There's always something. Always a new problem, a new challenge. I'm trying to keep everything together, but sometimes it feels like it's all falling apart." Lily could feel the tension in his voice, the frustration and fear that he had been holding back. She knew that he had always carried the burden of his company on his shoulders, but she had never seen him this worn out before. She took a deep breath and gently pulled him toward the couch. "Sit down," she said quietly. "Let me make you something to eat. You need to relax." James hesitated, then nodded, letting her lead him to the couch. He sat down, running his hands over his face, his mind racing with thoughts of work and the growing pressure he was feeling. He had always been the one to solve problems, to make things happen, but right now, he didn't know how to fix everything. He felt helpless, and it was a feeling he wasn't used to. Lily left the room and returned a few minutes later with a plate of food. She sat beside him, offering it to him with a gentle smile. He took the plate, but his mind was elsewhere. He could feel her presence, her care, but the worries of his business world kept pulling him away. As he picked at the food, he realized how much he needed her right now, not just as his wife in name, but as someone who understood him, who was there for him without asking for anything in return. "I don't know how you do it," he said quietly, his voice filled with a mix of admiration and vulnerability. "How do you stay so calm? So focused on the important things?" Lily looked at him, her eyes soft with understanding. "Because I know what's important, James. It's not the business, or the money, or the status. It's the people you love. It's the connections you have, the way you make others feel. And I can see that you care. I see it every time you talk about your family, about your future. You're not just a businessman. You're a person who wants something real, something meaningful. James felt his chest tighten as he heard her words. She was right, and for the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to accept that truth. He wasn't just a machine that worked endlessly to build his empire. He was a man who had the capacity to care, to love, to be loved in return. I've been so focused on keeping everything together that I forgot what really matters, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. I've been so afraid of losing everything that I've been pushing away the people who actually make life worth living. Lily reached out and took his hand, squeezing it gently. You're not alone in this, James, she said softly. You don't have to carry it all by yourself. I'm here. We're in this together. For a moment, they sat there in silence, the weight of their shared understanding filling the room. James realized that, for the first time in his life, he didn't have to face his problems alone. He had Lily by his side, and that was something he couldn't take for granted. As the evening wore on, they talked about everything and nothing, letting the pressure of the day slip away. For the first time in a long time, James felt like he could breathe. And in that moment, he knew that no matter what happened with his business, or with his family's legacy, the one thing that would always matter to him was the woman sitting beside him, holding his hand. Let's return to the story of how their relationship began to face new challenges and how they would tackle them together. Days turned into weeks, and James and Lily's relationship continued to evolve in ways neither of them had expected. The deeper they got into their arrangement, the more they realized that it was no longer just about fulfilling a contract, it was about real connection, understanding, and growth. They had become more than just two people pretending to be married. They were learning how to truly live together, share their fears, and even their dreams. James had been so consumed with work and maintaining the family legacy that he hadn't realized how much he needed Lily in his life. Her presence brought warmth and stability to his world, a world that had always been driven by ambition, success, and expectations. And for Lily, she found herself starting to believe that maybe, just maybe, she had found something in James she hadn't even known she was looking for. One evening, after a particularly stressful day at the office, James came home later than usual. The stress from work was clearly weighing on him, but when he stepped through the door, he was greeted by Lily's calm presence. She was sitting on the couch, reading a book, as if the world outside had not been spinning with chaos. It was in those moments, when she was just there, being herself, that James found his refuge. You're home late, Lily remarked gently, looking up from her book. She put it down and stood up as he walked in, concern flashing in her eyes. James sighed, running a hand through his hair. Yeah, it's been a long day. Things at work are a mess. I feel like I'm always putting out fires, but nothing ever gets better. His voice carried the weight of exhaustion, a burden he had been carrying alone for so long. Lily approached him, her voice soft but firm. James, you don't have to carry it all by yourself. I'm here. She reached out, gently taking his hand in hers, offering him the same support she had always given. For a moment, James felt a wave of gratitude wash over him. He had been so used to facing challenges alone, to keeping his emotions locked away. But with Lily, he didn't have to. She made him feel safe, even when everything else seemed to be falling apart. I know, he said quietly, his eyes meeting hers. I don't know what I would do without you. You've changed everything for me. Lily smiled softly, squeezing his hand. I'm glad to be here, James, but remember, you don't have to carry the weight of the world on your shoulders. You have me, and you always will. James took a deep breath, feeling a small sense of relief. He had been so focused on building his empire and maintaining his father's legacy that he had forgotten to care for the most important thing in his life, his own happiness. And now, with Lily, he was starting to understand what that meant. As they sat down on the couch together, Lily rested her head on his shoulder, her presence soothing his nerves. James wrapped his arm around her, pulling her closer. For the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to just be. There was no business to attend to, no meetings to prepare for. There was only this moment, this feeling of peace he had found with her. I never imagined that a contract marriage could turn into something like this, James said softly, his voice full of wonder. When we first started, I thought it was just about getting through the terms, fulfilling the agreement. But now, it's different. Lily lifted her head to look at him, her eyes filled with understanding. It's not just the contract anymore. It's real, James. I can feel it, too. What we have, it's more than just a piece of paper. We've built something here, together. James smiled, his heart full. I didn't think I could feel like this again. But with you, I do. And I'm not going to let it go. They sat in silence for a while, simply enjoying each other's company. The weight of the world outside seemed to disappear when they were together. For the first time in a long time, James allowed himself to be vulnerable. He wasn't just the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company. He was a man in love, a man who had found something worth fighting for. As the evening wore on, they talked about their hopes for the future, about what they wanted to build together, not just as a couple, but as partners in life. For the first time, James felt like he could dream again, not just about success or power, but about happiness, love, and the future he could have with Lily. We've got a long road ahead of us, Lily said quietly, but I'm ready for it. I'm ready for whatever comes next. James nodded, his eyes filled with determination. So am I. We're in this together, Lily, and no matter what, we'll face it side by side. As they looked toward the future, they knew that no matter what challenges awaited them, they would face them as equals. They were no longer just a contract marriage, they were partners in every sense of the word. Let's return to the story of how their bond grew even stronger, and how they continued to build a life that was truly their own. Months passed, and with each day that passed, James and Lily's relationship became something more solid, more genuine. What had started as a contract, a simple arrangement to fulfill the terms of his father's will, had transformed into a deep, unshakable bond. James no longer saw Lily as just his wife in name, a mere companion for appearances. She had become his partner in every sense of the word, and he realized that without her, his world would be incomplete. The business that had once consumed him now felt secondary to the love and peace he found in Lily's presence. Their marriage, though unconventional, had blossomed into something real. James had always thought that success and wealth were the answers to everything. But now, he knew better. What mattered was not the money or the power, it was the connection he shared with Lily, the love that had grown between them, quiet and steady, through the ups and downs. One evening, after a dinner together in their favorite quiet restaurant, James took Lily's hand as they walked along the city streets, their breath visible in the cool night air. The city lights twinkled around them, but for once, they didn't seem as important as the moment they were sharing. You know, James began, his voice soft, I never thought I would find someone like you. Someone who would make me see the world differently. You've changed my life in ways I never expected. Lily smiled, squeezing his hand. I think we've both changed each other, she said. When we first met, I never imagined this would be where we ended up. But now I can't imagine my life without you in it. James stopped walking for a moment, turning to face her. He cupped her face gently, looking into her eyes with a mixture of love and admiration. I don't ever want to let you go, Lily. What we have is real, and it's the most important thing in my life. Lily felt a lump in her throat as she looked at him, the man who had once seemed so distant, now standing before her, open and vulnerable. She never could have imagined that their journey would lead them here. From the moment she agreed to his contract, she had told herself to keep her heart guarded, to not get too attached. But now, she knew that the love they had was undeniable. I don't want to go anywhere either, she whispered, her voice full of emotion. You're everything to me, James. This was never just a contract. It was always meant to be more than that. With that, James smiled, his eyes bright with warmth. Then let's make it official, Lily. Let's build a life together, one that's not just based on a piece of paper, but on the love we've found. Lily's heart swelled as she listened to him. She never thought this would happen, not in a million years. But here they were, standing on the edge of a future they had both built together, one that was filled with love, trust, and the promise of something more. James dropped to one knee, his heart pounding as he looked up at her. "Lily, will you marry me? Not out of obligation, but because I love you. Because I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Will you be mine, forever?" Lily's eyes filled with tears as she looked down at him, the man who had once been a stranger, but now was the love of her life. Without hesitation, she nodded, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes," she whispered, her heart overflowing with joy. "Yes, I'll marry you, James. I love you." As James stood up, he took her into his arms, holding her close. The world around them seemed to fade as they shared a kiss, sealing the promise of a future they would face together. Their journey, once uncertain and filled with doubts, had now found its true path. It was no longer about a contract or fulfilling expectations. It was about two people who had found each other, against all odds, and were now ready to build a life based on love, trust, and the bond they had forged. Let's return to the story of how James and Lily's new life began, one filled with hope, dreams, and the shared commitment of a love that would last forever.